He thought he was just picking up the wrong woman. But that woman had quietly mended his heart years ago. And now, someone who arrived without saying a word was about to change everything. Sometimes, a stranger's silence lays the foundation of a life. And sometimes, the right person steps off the wrong plane. The rain was coming down like it was whipping the sky. The wipers were desperately trying to clear the windshield, but the view was getting blurrier by the second. Mark Webber was gripping the steering wheel of the hotel's black car tightly, his eyes fixed on the foggy glass. His last task of the day was to pick up a guest from the airport and then head home to see his son. He was exhausted from the day, but all he could think about was the book he'd read with 8-year-old Leo before bed. Maybe Leo would fall asleep halfway through again, but for Mark, those moments were the only peaceful breaks in his life. He was just about to shift into reverse when the glass doors of the terminal slid open. The woman who stepped outside looked so different that Mark instinctively pulled his hand away from the gear stick. She was dragging a slim leather suitcase, but what really stood out was how calm she was, walking straight into the rain without an umbrella. Her dark coat clung to her body. Her hair was stuck to her forehead, but her eyes, those eyes stirred something in Mark. It was like she had landed on the wrong planet. A stranger, lost, yet somehow familiar. He rolled the window down halfway, his voice mixing with the hum of the wind. "Miss Berger." The woman paused. Time seemed to slow down. There was a shift in her expression before she answered, a flicker of hesitation, then surprise, and finally an unexpected acceptance. "Yes," she said slowly. "I guess I am." Mark hesitated for a second. He felt like she wasn't the right person, but something inside him told him to open the door. There was something in her eyes that made it feel like he wasn't picking up a stranger, but continuing a story left unfinished. He unlocked the door. The woman quietly got into the back seat. All she said was, "Thank you." They didn't speak during the ride. Mark handed her a towel his son used for soccer practice, and she accepted it gently. The silence wasn't tense, it was something familiar and deep. When Mark saw her looking out the window, he eventually couldn't help himself and said, "The terminal was a bit chaotic today. Sorry I was late." Without turning her head, the woman replied, "It's okay. Some things are worth waiting for." That sentence wasn't just about an airport pickup. Mark knew that. The woman wasn't sitting in the back like a seer. She sat like someone who had been silent for years but had finally found a place to speak. She was strong, yes, but there was still a knot inside her, not yet untied. Mark saw it when he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He didn't know her, but it felt like he did. When they arrived at the hotel, the woman looked at him for a long moment before getting out, like she knew everything, but couldn't say it. "You don't remember me, do you?" Mark froze for a second. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" She smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "No, but I never forgot you." As she walked through the hotel's revolving door, Mark had let go of the wheel and was still trying to make sense of what she said. The sky, as if forgetting the storm moments ago, had gently cleared. The rain had stopped, but inside Mark, a new storm was just beginning. Her face, her voice, her arrival. They had triggered something. And soon, Mark would realize that this wasn't just about picking up the wrong passenger. It was the second chance fate had handed him, he just didn't know it yet. That night, Mark got home late. Leo was already asleep. The star-shaped night light in his room was still on. Mark pulled a book out of his bag and left it by his son's bedside, the story they had planned to read that day. But his mind was filled with a different story. The woman he met at the hotel. They had only spoken for a few minutes, but inside, it felt like he had just come out of a conversation that lasted for hours. "You don't remember me, do you?" That question kept echoing in his head. And the strangest part was, she really did seem familiar. But from where? The next morning, while Mark was making breakfast like he always did, Leo sat at the table with his sketchbook, scribbling something quietly without his dad noticing. "Dad, why were you sad last night?" Mark paused for a moment. "I wasn't sad, buddy. Just a little confused." "Was it someone who knew you but you didn't know them again?" Mark was surprised. "How did you know?" Leo shrugged. "Your face. It's always like that." At that moment, his phone buzzed. The hotel's message system popped up on the screen. "Guest, Elena Berger, room 1506, breakfast reservation 09:00. Elena Berger." So that was her name. And she was still there. Mark paused for a moment with his tea in hand. He didn't think he had heard that name before, yet something deep inside told him he did know her. as if one life path had once brushed up against another. The morning shift at the hotel was quiet. Mark carried bags, directed guests to their rooms. But his mind kept circling the same question. Who was she? Did he really know her? Or was he just placing emotional meaning on some gap in his past? At 9:05, Elena walked through the door of the lobby restaurant. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her hair tied back. At that moment, she didn't look like a CEO, more like someone quietly searching for peace. Her eyes scanned the tables, then met Mark's. For a moment, time slowed again. She didn't wave, didn't turn her head, but her gaze, it was there, deep, silent, full of 1,000 words she couldn't say. She ate breakfast alone, didn't read a book, didn't check her phone, just stared out the window at the sunlight that had taken the place of rain. And as she did, Mark slipped over to the front desk computer and looked through the guest list again. She was registered as Elena Berger, but something caught his eye in the notes section. Note: room not reserved by guest. Not listed on CEO guest list. Last-minute check-in. Asterisk. That note lit a spark in Mark. If she hadn't even made her own reservation, why was she there? And why had she looked at him that way when she heard his name? This couldn't just be a coincidence. That afternoon, as Mark was speaking in French with a couple near the elevator hall, Elena passed by. She paused briefly out of the corner of her eye, then kept walking. But a few minutes later, she was sitting in one of the lobby chairs, watching him. And it was only then that Mark could clearly name the feeling inside him. This woman remembered him, and not just vaguely deeply. When his shift ended, Mark stopped by the front desk before heading out. He was about to check some info when the clerk handed him a note. For Mr. Weber. Left from room 1506. Inside the envelope was a simple card. It read, "Thank you for staying silent in that hospital hallway that night. I didn't know your name, but your silence kept me alive." Elena, Mark's heart skipped a beat. A hospital? What night? But then, an image hit him, straight from years ago. A dimly lit corridor. A crying woman. The night he sat beside her and silently offered her his jacket. In that moment, Mark understood. He didn't know her, but once he had been there. Mark couldn't sleep all night. Those few lines on the card had opened the doors to a memory he had tried to bury deep in the past. It was years ago, the night Leo was born. His wife Mia had been rushed in for an emergency delivery, and Mark had spent the night pacing the corridor with trembling hands, waiting, praying. At one point, a young woman was sitting a few seats away, crying. Her face was buried in her hands. She didn't make a sound, but the shaking of her shoulders said it all. Mark hadn't spoken to her. He didn't have the courage or the words, but he had quietly sat beside her and placed his jacket over her shoulders. She didn't turn her head, but she clutched the jacket tightly. And in that moment, something had passed between them. Without words, without names, but something very real. Now that woman was standing before him, years later. Elena. And she was grateful to Mark. But the strangest part was this. After that night, Mark had almost forgotten her face. Or at least, he thought he had. Until he saw her again, and something in his heart clicked back into place. The next morning, Leo gave his dad a side glance at the breakfast table. "I heard you opened Mom's box last night." Mark paused. "What box?" "The one in your bedroom. With her letters, the bracelet, and that old sweater." Mark sighed. "Yeah, I was trying to remember someone." Leo nodded. Sometimes remembering someone is more important than knowing them. That day, work at the hotel was busy, but Mark's mind was a mess. Elena didn't come down for breakfast. She didn't show up at all until noon. Not until Mark stepped out of the service elevator and found Leo talking to her in the hallway. "Yes, Leo." She had knelt down to his level, holding a paper airplane in her hand. Leo was speaking excitedly. "I made this, but it doesn't fly straight. You know, my dad seems like he flies straight too, but he actually turns a lot. Still, he always gets to the right place in the end." Elena smiled. "Sounds like you and your dad got off the same plane." Mark laughed without meaning to. "My son keeps surprising me with how fast he meets CEOs." Elena stood up, and their eyes met. There was a seriousness behind her smile. "I should have introduced myself properly. Elena Berger." "I know," Mark said. He was referring to the note. Elena nodded. "That night, you didn't speak, but you sat next to me. Your silence was so powerful, I still haven't forgotten it. My mother had just died. My whole world collapsed. But you, by just staying, you showed me that life could go on. That's why I came. To say thank you." Mark's voice shook. I didn't think I helped anyone that night. I was just falling apart too. There was a moment of silence. Leo stepped back a little, but didn't take his eyes off them. Elena looked at Mark. You were strong then. You're even stronger now. But you're still alone. I can see it. Something stirred in Mark's heart. This woman showing up after all these years couldn't be just to say thank you. There was no emptiness in her presence. There was direction, a pull. As if life had brought them together not just for a night, but for something more this time. That evening, Elena was sitting on the quiet rooftop terrace of the hotel. The night air was cold on her skin, but she didn't leave. She just sat. Her eyes weren't staring into the distance, but into the depths of the past. Mark had finished his shift. He was about to go, but he couldn't. He walked up to the terrace. It's dangerous to sit here alone, he said quietly. Elena smiled. I'm not alone. I was just thinking. That night, no one said anything to me, but someone helped me just by staying. And I've thought about it for years. What kind of man was he? What kind of life did he live? Mark sat beside her. It wasn't exactly a well-planned life. But I have a son, and if I made it through that night, it's because of him. And now? Now, for the first time, I'm not just remembering things, I'm starting to feel them. Elena turned, looked into his eyes. Then keep feeling. Because this time, I didn't come to leave. Mark couldn't get Elena's last words from that night out of his head. This time, I didn't come to leave. It was a simple sentence, but it carried the silence of years. Whenever his mind drifted into emptiness, that voice echoed inside him. His eyes, his memory, his heart. It all seemed to have woken up at once. And strangely, for the first time, he felt vulnerable, but he wasn't afraid. The next morning, a hotel staff member brought Mark a small package. On it, there was only a short message. Thank your son. The wings are made right. Inside was the folded airplane Leo had given Elena the day before. But this time, it had been fixed, its flight balance adjusted. And beneath it, in elegant handwriting, one more note. Sometimes you just need to fix the angle. Flying is always possible. Mark was getting Leo ready for school when it arrived. As the little boy put on his boots, he looked up. Is that woman still here? Elena? Yeah, I think she's staying a bit longer. Good. Because I liked her. And I think you did too. Leo? No, not like in the stories. But when you see her, you're less quiet. That's a good thing. Mark was often amazed at how a child that age could speak such truth. Leo had lost his mother shortly after birth. But somehow, out of that loss, he had become someone who heard more than other kids did. As the day went on, Mark's thoughts kept circling one decision. He had to ask Elena something. Because her arrival no longer felt like coincidence, it felt like life quietly giving him an answer. That afternoon, Elena was sitting in the hotel's small library lounge. She had a book in her hands, but her eyes were focused on the window rather than the pages. Mark approached the door, paused for a moment, and then slowly sat beside her. Did you actually read that book? Elena turned her head and smiled. I turned the pages, yes, but my mind was somewhere else with every sentence. Same here, said Mark. Today I realized something. Maybe it sounds silly, but you showing up after all these years. It doesn't feel like a debt. It feels like a calling. Elena stayed silent, but her eyes agreed with him. Mark continued. I had forgotten what I did that night. I didn't carry it with me the way you remembered it. But you held on to that silence in your heart all these years. She lowered her head. I didn't forget because that night was the first time I found silence to be safe. Everyone kept telling me what to do. Cry, pull myself together, sign things. But one person didn't say anything. He just stayed. And for the first time, I could breathe. Mark slowly placed his hand on the table. What do you want now, Elena? I mean, do you want to rewrite this story? Or is this just a final thank you and goodbye? Elena took a deep breath. Once, a stranger's silence gave me the strength to survive. Now, I want to give something to that same stranger. To stay. This time, Mark didn't speak, but his eyes welled up. Sitting across from him was a woman ready to stay, not because she needed anything, but simply to be there. And what scared him wasn't her feelings, it was his own old fears, getting used to someone, then losing them. That was the cliff Mark had been avoiding for years. Just then, his phone buzzed. A message from Leo's school had arrived. Elena Berger is listed as the person who picked up Leo at the scheduled time. We assume this is authorized. Mark suddenly jumped up. Did you pick up Leo? Elena's eyes widened, panicked. Yes. I mean, when we talked yesterday, You said I could pick him up. I also informed the school by message. Did I misunderstand? Mark took a breath. The jolt of fear he felt was like an instinct from the past. But the surprise in Elena's eyes was genuine. No, it's just. You could have told me. I guess I'm still not ready to share everything with someone. Elena stayed quiet. If you're not ready, I understand that too. But I never meant to take anything from you. I just wanted to be near. Mark ran a hand through his hair. Elena, I don't know what this is. But after you, silence doesn't sound the same anymore. Elena nodded. Then let's be quiet together this time. That night, when Leo fell asleep on the couch, Elena was still sitting beside Mark. They didn't watch a movie, didn't listen to music, didn't have deep conversations. They had just sat side by side. And maybe, sometimes life writes its best stories between people who don't need big words to understand each other. In the morning, when the kitchen was filled with sunlight, Mark still hadn't woken up, but Leo's voice was already echoing through the house. Miss Elena, I flipped your egg, but I might have flipped it a bit too much. Elena laughed back. That's okay, Leo. Being brave in the kitchen is a good thing. When Mark opened his eyes, there was an unfamiliar warmth on his face. The sound of laughter coming from inside the house felt foreign, but also like something he had missed for a long time. After Mia, the house had fallen into silence. Arguing with someone over breakfast, smelling a stove burning in the next room, hearing a child's laughter in the hallway. All of it had become almost alien to him. But now Elena was there, and her presence was changing everything. Not quietly, but in a genuine, warm, natural way. At breakfast, the three of them sat together. Leo talked, Elena smiled, Mark watched silently. But the joyful air at the table didn't match the fear that was slowly building inside Mark. A part of him wanted to protect this harmony, but another part felt the weight of responsibility. Because if Elena stayed, things could get complicated. And if she left, life would return to silence. But what about Leo? That evening, after putting his son to bed, Mark sat by the window in the living room with Elena. Outside, the wind gently shook the tree branches. Elena sat with a blanket in her lap. Mark chose his words carefully. Do you really want to stay here, Elena? I mean, as more than just a guest. Elena spoke without taking her eyes off the window. I'm asking myself that too. But I've realized something, Mark. I spent years trying to be strong, to stay on top, to make decisions, to run a company. But the moment I remember most was sitting beside you in that hallway. Because that was the first time I had just been. And now, sitting in the same room with you and Leo, I feel that same thing again. Mark nodded. I'm afraid to let you into my life. Because if I love you, and then lose you again, how do I explain that to Leo? How do I explain it to myself? Elena turned to him, her eyes serious. I'm not Mia, and I'm not asking you to replace her. But I can tell you this. The ones who leave become memories. The ones who stay become breath. I want to breathe with you. But if you don't want that, I'll leave. Quietly. Because I met you truly that night, the man who stayed beside me despite his own fears. Mark stood up and paced a few steps near the window. Then he stopped. Talking to you makes me feel lighter. But at the same time, you touch my past like a blade. It's strange, Elena. Really strange. Elena stood too. You know what's strange? Spending your whole life getting on the wrong planes and still ending up with the right people. You were my wrong plane, Mark. And I'm glad you were. Mark was shaken by those words. Part of him wanted to run, the other wanted to stay. But then he remembered Leo's childish drawing. 3 people holding hands, a sun above their heads, a dog beside them, something they didn't have yet, but maybe something he dreamed of. The next morning, Elena packed her suitcase. It was the last day of her hotel stay. She hadn't said she was leaving, but it was clear she had made up her mind. During his lunch break, Mark picked up Leo from school and they went out for ice cream. When they returned home, they found an envelope on the table. Inside was a short note. Some people only cross your path once. But if you're brave enough to return to where they waited, they'll still be there. Leo looked up. Is she leaving? Mark closed his eyes. I think so. So, are we going to go get her back? Mark didn't look away from his son's eyes as he answered. Only when we're truly ready. But that night, sleep didn't come for Mark. The home that had changed with Elena's presence now felt incomplete again with her absence. Her cup was still in the kitchen corner. Her blanket still unfolded on the couch. This wasn't a goodbye. This was a door left open by a heart that was still waiting. And now Mark knew. She had become more than someone to find. Elena had come to fix the past with a thank you, but what she left behind was the future. And letting her go this time might be his greatest mistake. Mark had woken up early in the morning, but his body remained still. He stared at the ceiling, as if caught in the middle of a battle. Should he go? Or had he already missed his chance by not acting sooner? Leo was still asleep, his lips moving slightly in his sleep, mumbling something. Mark slowly sat up and walked to the window. The day hadn't fully broken, but the light was growing. There was a silence in the air, just like the note Elena had left behind, heavy, yet full of hope. As the coffee machine started working, he looked again at the drawing Leo had hung on the wall. 3 people holding hands. And underneath, written in large letters by Leo, us. Mark took a deep breath. Us. That word was the only thing he had truly felt belonged to him in recent years. And now he knew, if something was to be done, it had to be this morning. He grabbed his jacket without touching his coffee. He stood by Leo's bed and placed a kiss on his forehead. I need to go find someone, son, he whispered. Are you leaving? Leo asked in his sleepy voice. Yes, but this time I'm running. Leo's reply was short and clear. Don't be late. Elena was sitting on a chair by the window at the terminal. Her flight was still 40 minutes away, but in her mind, time had stopped. The ticket in her hand would take her to another continent, maybe even another life. But the cracks inside her were still there. Mark's silence, Leo's honesty, the little universe that revolved around that breakfast table in the house. All of it was still here, inside her. She pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket, the airplane drawing Leo had given her. On the back, in a child's handwriting, it said, "You're flying, but we're holding you." Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe she shouldn't go, but she wasn't the one who could make that decision. This time, she would wait. If Mark came, the story would begin again. If he didn't, life would go on from where it left off. Incomplete, but with dignity. Just then, someone came running through the terminal. His hair tangled in the wind, coat unbuttoned, shoes muddy. But his eyes were shining. Mark. Elena's heart felt like it was about to leap out of her chest. When their eyes met, Mark didn't stop. He came to her. His hands were shaking, but his voice was clear. Don't miss your flight. But if you really don't want to leave, I finally found the courage to ask you to stay. Elena didn't answer, but there was a light in her eyes like never before. Why? She asked softly. Because I first met you in silence. But now, I want a life where we can speak. With you. With Leo. Not just to stay this time, to live. Elena closed her eyes, took a deep breath, then tore up her ticket. A soft sound of paper, and a decision that would change the direction of the past. I had already decided to stay, she said. I just needed to know if you wanted it too. That day, when they returned home, Leo was the first to open the door. When he saw Mark and Elena, he wasn't surprised at all. I drew a table for you, he said. Why a table? Elena asked. Because tables are always set in the same place, and people come back to them every day. Weeks passed, months followed, but the table stayed in place. One morning, Leo handed them a sheet of paper. This time it's not just a drawing. This is our family plan. On it were 3 figures. Mark, Elena, and Leo, all holding hands. But this time, something new was written beneath. Us, the ones who didn't break. And one day, Elena quietly whispered in Mark's ear, "You thought you picked the wrong woman at the airport. But actually, life found a way to take you to the right one." Mark smiled. That flight got canceled. But fate was still ready for takeoff.